Sometimes old things hold a lot of value. It is true that I like fancy hotel rooms, but honestly, I get the best sleep sleeping at my friend's old beach cabin that still has quilts and afghans that his grandmother and probably his great-grandmother made. The cabin smells of old wood, seawater, and late loud nights of laughing, playing board games and euchre, and quiet early mornings staring at the crashing surf while the others are still asleep. And it is also true, I am grateful for the prescriptions that help my autoimmune issues. But honestly, I have gotten far more lifelong health from Paul Pitchford's book, Healing with Whole Foods. Herbalists and traditional nutritionists know a lot that is lost to modern medicine. Today's episode is about slowing down and realizing the good to be found in the natural past, so that maybe we can embrace it in our hectic present. If you want to learn about cannabis health, cultivation, and technique efficiently and with good cheer, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. We'll send you new podcast episodes as they come out, delivered right to your inbox, along with commentary on a couple of the most important news items from the week and videos too. Don't rely on social media to let you know when a new episode is published. Sign up for the updates to make sure you don't miss an episode. This month's giveaway from Dynamyco Mycorrhizal Inoculant is a little bit different than how we normally do it. The first 200 people to follow the link on the Shaping Fire Instagram profile or on the Shaping Fire website page for this episode and fill out the form on the Dynamyco website will receive a free 20-gram package of Dynamyco. You don't even have to pay for shipping. I have used Dynamyco for 5 seasons now, and it clearly, drastically improves root growth. Young plants grow faster and more efficiently. New soil matures more swiftly. Mycorrhizal networks expand and thicken. Welcome to episode 111. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and I am your host, Shango Los. My guest today is Jeff Nordal, better known on Instagram as Jade Nectar. Jeff has been studying cannabis, natural medicine, and psychedelics since his teens. He has a background as an early internet entrepreneur, but became seriously ill in his 30s only to find out he had contracted Lyme disease. Conventional medicine held no solutions for him. Jeff turned to cannabis medicine in his home of Santa Cruz and started getting results. He became an expert on the acid form of cannabinoids and cannabis leaf juicing and started a local medical collective to get it in the hands of patients. Jeff Nordal now holds 11 patents for using cannabis as food, though he doesn't like patents and got them defensively so no one could ever tell him to stop juicing cannabis leaves for patients. He is presently building out the Jade Grove Farm and Wellness Center deep in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He also has grown more landrace varieties of cannabis than anyone I've ever met. During the first set today, we will discuss the difference between landrace, wild, feral, heritage, and hybrid varieties of cannabis. In the second set, we will learn about the cultivation demands of landraces, hot and cold adapted landraces, and hear about some of the more exotic morphology and terpene profiles Jeff has come across. And during the third set, we will explore breeding with landraces and finish the episode with a discussion of landrace preservation. Welcome to Shaping Fire, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's so great
to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. You know, ever since I came across your Jade Nectar profile on Instagram and started watching your tours of all the land races in your garden, I immediately kind of became a fanboy, I must say. Just watching your videos, I'm like, oh, look at that plant, and oh, look at that plant. And it was like the same reason I love going through botanical gardens, right? It's just once you fall in love with plants, you know, I started with the cannabis plant, but then that love kind of became all plants. So to be able to see lots of varieties of a plant together, it's really like nerdy nature fun for people like us who cultivate.
Oh, yeah.
But then to see your Instagram where it's just one after another and they look different in the colors, and you know, you've got a bit of teaching vibes about it. You know, you kind of tell us about the plant and everything. And so I just started as a fan and a follower, and then after I went through enough of your videos over time, I'm all like, oh dude, I think this would make a really great episode. So I'm really grateful that you accepted my invitation to come on the show. So thanks for that.
Well, cool. And if you're enjoying it through the video, just through the interwebs. Yeah, you should come out in person sometime.
Well, it doesn't
full experience.
Well, thank you. It doesn't take much of encouragement to get me to come to Santa Cruz. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So, all right, man. Well, let's get right into it. When people talk about land races, people use that word kind of like a bucket, right? Because a lot of people don't understand the idea of land race or where that definition begins or ends, and then it starts to get mixed in with other words like heritage and heirloom and varieties, and so the definition is a bit muddied. So let's kind of talk around this idea and tease out some of the interesting meanings, especially somebody like you who spends their whole time in the landrace world. I can imagine you would have a different take on it. So why don't we just go ahead and start with like the word landrace, and why don't you get us started there?
Yeah. So landrace, and I had to do my own research as well. It is interesting that even different industries and such have different definitions for what landrace is, but it turns out that landrace, I believe, I should look this up, but I think it's a German word for landrace, I think. So that means, and that translates into English like country breed. So right off the bat, landrace is domestic. These are domesticated varieties, but you can also have landrace dogs, landrace pigs, chickens, cucumbers, melons. So it's nothing specific to cannabis whatsoever. It has to do with just agriculture or animal breeding. But what it is and why land races are unique is they're actually tied to a specific region. So there's this interplay between, so let's say a cannabis plant shows up in some area, let's say in, I don't know, Thailand. So there you've got a wet tropical environment, and the people who want to grow the cannabis there are going to be now breeding with their cannabis, taking cues from the environment over time. So let's say they grow 100 plants, but 50%, if it were, let's say, like an Afghan or arid environment genetic that came to this village in Thailand, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, probably half of them would mold because they're not adapted for all that moisture and humidity. But the humans would start picking, and taking the seeds from the plants that actually fared pretty well. So now there's human selection going on to find those seeds or those genetics that actually thrive in their local environment. So once that gets established as far as something that can actually survive and make it to the finish line and produce, flowers without melting down, now the humans might start selecting more for effects. Say, I like that culture may actually appreciate a very energizing electric psychedelic effect in their cannabis. So then they start selecting for that. So now you're starting to infuse cultural values and cultural utility into this plant while also selecting for things that actually thrive in that environment. So that's kind of the interplay with for landrace, is it happens over time with pressures from the environment and also the aesthetic and desire and utility of the humans who are growing them. And if these are isolated from all other cannabis plants, you can imagine over, generation, 50 generations, 100 generations, now you're going to have a very unique cannabis variety that's unique just to that particular, let's say, village.
Jeff, I think I'm going to set you up for your next definition because, you've already surprised me. The definition of landrace already is not what I thought it was going to be because I was under the impression that landraces were untouched by humans, that we had, like, as soon as you said domesticated, I'm like, my eyebrow goes up because I'm like, domesticated?
No.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest, I don't know where the genesis of this.
Am I talking about wild versus landrace?
You're talking about wild or feral.
Okay.
Yeah. So landrace is 100% influenced by humans. These are domestic. So if we want to start talking analogies here, start thinking as far as dog breeds. So if anyone's familiar with, let's say, Anatolian shepherds, or Kangal dogs. These are these big sheep protector guard dogs that are used in the Anatolian mountains in Turkey, and they require a very large dog to fight off wolves and bears. They need to be very independent. They actually go out with the sheep without any humans and will just watch after the sheep, but also go and hunt and provide food for themselves. But the Anatolian shepherds, it's not a specific standard breed that, has to be 16 inches from tail to snout or any of these standard breed dimensions. Within the Anatolian shepherd or Kangal type of dog, you actually get all different color types, all different variations and such, but at the same time, they're similar. And they perform a utility, which is guarding sheep and being independent and also being able to handle the environment. So they have a really nice double coat that keeps them insulated in the winter, but cool in the summer. So that's an Anatolian shepherd. You also have things like huskies, Eskimo dogs. You'll see there's tons of variants in those dogs between each one. So you've got a lot of genetic diversity, but it's also bred by humans to pull dog sleds. But there's no, like kennel club sitting there going and measuring the dogs for specific traits. And so those are actually considered landrace dogs. And you can apply the same thing to carrots, cucumbers, pigs. So
I find it very interesting that now in my head, a cultural use and human intention is now part of the landrace definition for me.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's a surprise for me. So let's move forward and have you talk a little bit about the feral and wild type, which is what is in my head as landrace.
Okay, and here's another thing. This is, and by the way, I have read websites, cannabis websites that just kind of become these echo chambers that just poach other information, just keep repeating the same fallacy over and over. And for some reason, there are cannabis websites that do define landrace as wild, untouched by humans. And that
we all know that most of the cannabis websites are garbage anyway. They're just people trying to throw up content so they can sell advertising, Well,
so right off the bat, just landrace is fully domestic. Just do a Google search of the definition of landrace, and you'll find out the first thing it says is it's a domestic breed.
Also, honestly, even more important than that, like you're friends with Rob Clark, right? So your definitions are bounced off of Rob Clark, the god of cannabis genetics. So I'm going to go with what you're going to say more than what I'm going to read just about anywhere else.
So here's another thing, and I don't want to get in like pissing matches with people who say, oh no, it's wild cannabis and such. So I just went, luckily, I'm very fortunate and honored to have developed a bit of a relation with Rob Clark, and he came out and visited. He's been out to our farm now 3 times. Just no particular agenda. We just like hanging out. We got 300 landrace varieties all growing in the same garden, so it's kind of just sort of wonderland. For folks.
Yeah, it's a cannabis amusement park is what it is.
It's stoner fantasy land. And it's just, so anyway, he was kind enough to also send an email with his takes on these definitions just to clear things up. And yeah, I'll, if okay, not to be super boring, I'll just read a few sentences from his actual email. I hope he said it's okay to share this. But
yeah, sure. So long as they're not too long. Well, go ahead.
No. But right off the bat, landraces are essentially locally adapted plant and animal varieties that evolve in response to natural environmental selective pressures in tandem with simple human selection for favorable characteristics without formal breeding. So, and it says all domestic plants and animals originated from wild populations evolving naturally. Once humans entered the scene, the first steps towards landrace evolution began. So there you go. So it's not a just keeping one line of breeding a particular genetic for just, like that ultimate seed or clone. It's not a narrow breeding project. It's a big, large, wide, sort of open pollination usually type breeding project. But then selecting, most likely what would happen is then you go and select the seeds from the plants that finished the best out of, let's say, a whole patch, like a large field of cannabis. And then the ones that made it to the finish line, and then when you sample them, they're awesome. And you go, I want to grow the seeds from this plant next year. So that way the human is now very much influencing and selecting for their traits. So that is the landrace. And then the other part that's really important is that they're unique to that region, because now they've been isolated in that physical geographic region for so long that they're now like totally unique compared to, land races in other parts of the world.
Right on. So we've established landrace good. Let's move forward a little bit. Now, are wild and feral synonymous, or are those individual ideas too?
No, and we're good. And if, as far as running the analogy, the dog analogy, what feral is it's domestic cannabis that has escaped the farm. And now it's off growing wild, but it's not actually the true wild original cannabis variety. So
it's like post-farm wild.
Yeah, so this would be like in Australia, if we're doing our dog analogy here, this would be the dingo, right? So the dingoes were a domestic dog that was introduced into Australia, I think like 4,000 years ago or so. And then it went totally feral. Now it's actually part of the ecosystem in Australia, but it was never actually a wild, naturally occurring wolf. It was
never indigenous. It was brought in.
Correct. And it was a domestic dog that then went feral and now is part of that environment. So cannabis is very adaptable and such. So if it escapes the farm, and by the way, in the Midwest, in the U.S., we still have ditchweed that's escaped hemp from the hemp farms, the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. And so that's still growing. But when a plant goes feral, it's now doesn't have that human infusion or intention going on with it. So now it's just the plant doing its thing with its only motivation is to keep making more seed. Mm-hmm. So most likely when you have feral populations, the taste, the potency of THC or whatever cannabinoid you're going for is the plant doesn't even care about that. It just wants to make seed. So now you're going to get, a hardier, more adaptive for survival and reproducing plant for the cannabis plant. But probably the desirable human traits are going to start fading on those feral populations.
Right on. I identify with feral. I think I'm falling further and further out of normative society as well.
Yeah. So, exactly. So if you went full off the grid and went and lived in a hut or a cave out in the middle of the night and started raising a family and such like that,
that would be the full embrace of it.
You'd be then more adapted for hunting and gathering and not sitting
at a computer,
social media.
Yeah. All right. So let's contrast then that to wild, which would probably be a plant that is indigenous to that biosphere, but has never been domesticated and farmed.
Exactly. And the thing is most likely, so, and again, this is from Robert Clark, who also has sort of combined all of the cannabis research. He's got a great book. I think it's called Ethnobotany, Cannabis Ethnobotany. It goes and actually, it's very information dense. So
it's a heavy duty read.
It's not just a casual sit by the fire kind of thing, but it is a really, really, really a great resource for going. And what they've done is just tracked and basically agree with all these other botanists and scientists and ethnobotanists who've tracked the original origin of cannabis seems to come from what's now geographically in China. And that is where the original wild cannabis seemed to originate from. But because domestic cannabis, was cultivated and used for 10,000 plus years in that same area, it's highly unlikely that the original wild cannabis didn't get crossed with domestic cannabis at some point. So to differentiate the true wild origin cannabis from feral domestic cannabis, it's kind of almost impossible to do that, and most likely it went extinct through hybridization with other domestic varieties over the past 10,000 years. So, most likely the original wild cannabis no longer exists.
All right, so then to cap off this line of definitions, why don't we finish off with polyhybrid, and then we'll start talking about morphology.
Okay, and then one other one that's part of this is also heirloom or heritage varieties.
Good.
So, and that's more, those would be specific breeding projects. A lot of times, sort of like we've got it going on in California, especially up in Humboldt and Mendocino and such. Actually was just reading about some of these, the Huckleberry Hill farms. By the way, I got to sample some of their whitethorn rose, which I guess is getting a lot of attention right now. And that is the only like cannabis from a dispensary that I've sampled in the last few years that was like, wow, that took me back to like Grateful Dead parking lot, kind bud, like, old school, really, really, really beautiful cannabis. So, but I looked into their story and such, and I think somewhat in that lineage, he calls it like mom's weed. So that would be like heirlooms where families actually have worked and developed their own, strain and pass that down through the generations to like family and friends and such like that. So that's like an heirloom right there where it's being passed through.
That just warms my heart, just even thinking about looking at the genetic line and seeing mom's weed. Like that is the heart of cannabis and like the human relationship with the plant, right? When it's like pre the names, pre the categories for sale, and pre-competition between people. It's just, this was our family's particular strain that we loved and we had at our holidays. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. So all right, so mom's heirloom.
So that's kind of more like heirloom where it's being passed, just like heirloom furniture and such. You're passing it through generations. And then but then heritage strains would follow that same pattern or sort of be in that same category, only that might be more widely distributed. So, and a lot of times heritage or or heirlooms exist only in clone
Mm-hmm.
cuttings form. I mean, they may back them up with seeds, but a lot of times things, like Trainwreck, AK-47, old school, even I guess like old school Super Silver Haze, Northern Lights, and things like that. Those are more like the heritage, like original foundation strains that did get passed around through the community.
Right on. So let's go back to the polyhybrid then, and then cap off with that.
So now polyhybrids, and there's nothing wrong or unethical or things to be snooty about with, with polyhybrids. It's just now what seems to be going, and this isn't just, this is my personal opinion, but a lot of other folks are coming to the same conclusion, is, and if we're going to do our dog breeding analogy again, most of the modern cannabis that's now on the scene is like the Labradoodle times 10. So now you've got Labradoodles crossed to Pugdoodle or Puggles, back to a Pit Bull, back to a Labradoodle, back to a Cocker Spanidoodle, and it's all this, and it almost doesn't even have any necessarily any intention for like, oh, I want to create like a really racy, high creative variety that tastes like passion fruit. You know what I mean? It's more, okay, gelato was hot last month, and wedding cake is hot right now, so we're going to cross those two and call this gelato cake.
It just on its face, it sounds less reputable because you're breeding for marketing hype instead of breeding, to go back to your dog example, breeding for the dog that can take care of the sheep and feed itself in the wild, right? Like one has authentic human cultural meaning and the other one is for capitalism.
And it's just, it's like top 40 hits, like these just riding hype for the next 30, 60 days. And it's almost like if people were hanging outside like a dog show, like a breeder's, I don't know, these kennel club dog shows.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, your dog won the best in terrier class and yours won the best in this. So how about we just cross them together?
And so now we have a Doberman Schnauzer or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the hot new dog that's going to win the next year's kennel club, and then you just do that exponentially and that's where we're at now. We have like all these, whoever won all the cups or whatever is getting attention, then you just cross all that stuff together, and it's just become this muddled genetics and the effects. It's not just me saying this. I've heard this confirmed, and there's a lot of consensus seems to be going on in the community at this point that you can't really tell the difference between smoking runts or wedding cake or Oreos or peanut butter cookie breath or whatever. It's like it all basically kind of tastes, looks, and all kind of feels the same. And unfortunately, it's not. Everyone has different, objectives and such with their stonerism and what they're going for and such. But a lot of people like that like a creative, uplifting, inspiring, clear head and such, and feeling active and kind of amplifying life. Where now a lot of the cannabis varieties right now seem to be more of like an opiate sedative, kind of lethargic, tired.
Well, it's that myrcene dominance that's all through the modern commercial strains, right?
And so it's just so, and to each their own. It's not to be snot. There's a time and place for couch lock and such, but but yeah, if every cannabis variety now that you find at a dispensary gives you that same couch lock, I forgot my name, I'm just gonna sit in my underwear and play video games and eat pizza. If that's the same effect, you've now, it's kind of like all the vast world of all these different dog breeds with all these different personalities and fun characteristics have now all been sort of hybridized and homogenized into this just blah. Same exact uniform, kind of boring effect.
And it's not to the fault of the modern cannabis consumer or enthusiast either, right? Because, the vast majority, like 99% of what's available is the modern polyhybrid stuff. And, I've been a cannabis enthusiast for, 35, 40 years now, something like that. And, and it wasn't until I came across, my buddy shared with me some cuttings of an authentic Acapulco Gold. And I'm like, oh, this is what all those people who were 10 years older than me were talking about because the high was so entirely different. And then I decided, I'm like, well, I can't grow that here where I live outside. And so I was able to get some, actually he's from your area, Eric Miner of HBK Genetics. He used to live in the Santa Cruz region. He's got this 20-week black Colombian landrace that I grew indoors. And like those two plants are unlike everything else that I have smoked and have grown just because, and so, when you say that, okay, your pound cake tastes like your cookies, tastes like your this, your that, right? It's because the modern commercial cannabis is pulling from this very small pool of commercially viable genetics. Whereas, if those same people were able to get access to, equatorial plants and Thai and Colombia and all these, and then smoke them against each other. Well, suddenly their taste palette has expanded, and now they see that they've been looking down right at this particular genetic pool, but not the global genetic pool.
Exactly, and so a lot of times when I break out, like an Acapulco or a Thai variety, or just right now loving some stuff from Sri Lanka. And by the way, a lot of these land races that we're growing are seeds that were sourced back in the 70s. So it's not even, so you're geographically traveling and culturally traveling, but you're also time traveling.
I like that, yeah.
So there's this myth that now the weed today is stronger and better, but once you sample like a 1970s Pakistan or 1970s Sri Lankan or some of these old, people who went on the hippie trail or worked at the Peace Corps in some of these areas and brought back seeds, from almost
wherever.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you grow them out and smoke them, and you're like, oh my God, the weed was incredibly psychedelic back then. Incredibly, it's like a whole different category. It's almost verging on psilocybin, like, like a low dose of mushrooms.
And a lot of the modern, enthusiasts, they haven't had that opportunity, and so they're just all like, oh, but the percentage THC on those older strains were so low, and now I've got this thing that somehow is over 30, and like it's so much better. But a lot of these smokers don't understand the important role that prevalent terpenes placed in those older strains, in these untouched strains that they might be 12 or 18%. But their terpene percentage is so high, and that's what sculpts the high, the experience that you have, and that's where the real difference comes from. It's not about the THC; it's about the whole bouquet.
So that's what's going. It's like the symphony orchestra. So yeah, you have the bassoons and the timpanis, and you have the cellos, and you have French horns going on and things. They don't play a major role, but they add so much texture and counterpoint and diversity within the sound that there's this whole communication going on. But now what seems to be going on with, if there's only so much real estate on the cannabis plant. So if you're up at 35% THC, that's kind of like the symphony orchestra. There's only so much stage. So that means you have to kick out all the other instruments to make way for, now you have 200 violin players all playing the exact same note.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And it's just playing the exact same melody. And it's still, it's still music.
Still good. It's just not as
going.
complex.
Yeah, you've just lost all that complexity, and now it's more of a one-dimensional buzz experience instead of this big symphony tapestry of textures and counterpoints and polyrhythms and such like that. So that's kind of one analogy, and you could even go like Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia style. I mean,
let's not go let's not go there. We only have so much show, and you and I are both deadheads, and that will be the rest of the show. So I actually want to move forward off of the definitions, and because we're coming up on a commercial not too far from now, but I want to get some of these other ideas in here that sometimes let's take that black Colombian I mentioned earlier as an example. Okay. So, we, meaning cannabis cultivators that are growing now, we will get something like a Colombian or a Syrian, or, wherever this particular, landrace has come from. And people treat it like that is, not just an example, but that is the type of plant that everybody in, Colombia or Sri Lanka, you mentioned earlier, as if one plant is the only plant that is grown there. And I just like to talk to that idea, because I think that is a real common misnomer in the modern cannabis world, that just because you've had one plant from, a growing region, that you've had what they have to offer, and I just really feel like that's probably not true.
Yeah, that's not reality. And all you have to do is go to Mendocino or go to Big Sur, even go back in time, 50 years ago, when things were, more on the down low, but was every single family and every single grower growing the exact same genetics? And the answer's no. It's not in Sri Lanka or Afghanistan. There's not like a cannabis club where they all vote on what genetics every single cannabis
which one is going to be
grow.
The official genetic of their growing region. Yeah.
No, they're all doing their own thing, but they're also kind of, one, they probably, are sourcing their genetics from similar gene pools, just because the world hasn't been globalized for all that long, so limited, genetic resources. They're going to pull from things they have in the area. But then they're also, going to also select for things that do well in that same region. So you're going to have similarities, but are they all going to be exact carbon copies of each other? And the answer is absolutely not.
It kind of reminds me of your Huckleberry Hill example from earlier, where back in the genetic line is mom's favorite. Like, in Sri Lanka, it's not, they're just producing one kind. All these different families have got their mom's favorite. And so, they've got just as much diversity as we're experiencing now. It's just that seeds are so hard to get from these areas that, one variety makes its way out and then unfortunately becomes the example for the whole region, because that's the only thing we're able to get.
Yeah, but they will be similar though. I mean, what's happening now though in Thailand is all the Amsterdam and Cali genetics are coming in
and polluting their land races.
That's the really scary thing. That's a whole nother topic of discussion, but we may be experiencing a global landrace extinction due to hybridization. It's basically like if you let labradoodles out to roam free and they went and basically copulated with every dog breed on the planet, now everything's been doodled. And by the way, I don't have anything against doodle. I actually have a schnoodle, schnauzer poodle, mixed dog. So they're
but it makes your point though.
What I'm saying is, do we want to live in a world where every dog breed has been doodleized?
Yeah.
And every cannabis has been cookie cake gelato.
Yeah. Right on. Well, hey, I don't think I'm going to top don't doodle your cannabis anymore in this in this first set. So let's end there and go for a commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to start talking about terpene profiles in Landraces. So let's go ahead and take
Yeah.
All right.
Can I say one other tiny little thing about the landrace and
sure,
that whole wild sort of feral definition and such? And this is a really important thing for sort of ethics, morals of land races. So the definition that some folks have worked up, the wrong definition that land races are just kind of wild and feral and growing on the side of the road, also sets up a situation of appropriation and complete erasing of the farmer who developed the landrace variety. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So here, maybe in the U.S., if you all of a sudden have some really cool Thai variety, if you're totally discounting that this is probably hundreds of years of genetic work by actual humans in Thailand, in whatever region or village, who created this like totally sublime variety. If you think that it was just growing on the side of the road, wild, all of a sudden there's no credit, there's no honor, there's no respect for those farmers. And then you're more apt to just name it something or even call it your weed. And you've just erased the human work that actually got that strain to that sublime state. So it's just really important for landrace to also fully credit these amazing cannabis intuitive breeders who develop these like absolutely sublime varieties. So a lot of human work went in to get them to this point. And just because you took a vacation to Thailand and brought back some seeds doesn't mean you created that strain.
Man, that's a really good point. And I'm glad that you held me up to put that in there. So, all right. Thank you. All right. Now let's go to commercial. We're going to take that short break and be right back. You're listening to Shaping Fire. And my guest today is landrace specialist Jeff Nordal. And, without these advertisers, Shaping Fire would not happen. So please support them and let them know that you heard them on Shaping Fire. One of the reasons why no-till cannabis growing is so valued by farmers is because the mycelium networks in the soil remain established from year to year. And we know these fungal networks are essential because they are the nutrient superhighways that extend far and wide in the substrate to feed your plants. The trouble with growing in new living soils or blended cocoa substrates is that it takes most of the plant's life just to create these mycelium highways. Dinomyco endomycorrhizal fungi inoculant reduces that time and gets your plant eating a wider array of nutrients faster. And it's 3 times the concentration of the other popular brand in the US at 900 propagules per gram of 2 fungal species selected specifically for cannabis cultivation. Dinomyco is the result of 30 years of research and trials at the Volcani Agriculture Research Institute in Israel. It has also been vigorously trialed by cannabis and food growers across the U.S. Dinomyco is now available at grow shops and on Amazon in the United States. I love using Dinomyco to both speed up the growth of the mycelium networks in the soil, but also as a biostimulant to make clone cuttings more virile. You can see side-by-sides showing the comparative growth on their Instagram at Dinomyco. If you demand reliable growing results and appreciate the importance of an active root zone in creating a thriving plant, I encourage you to check out dinomyco.com and use the store locator to find out where you can get yours. That's dynomyco.com. Shaping Fire listeners can get 10% off any size of Dynamyco on dynamyco.com by using the discount code SHAPINGFIRE, one word, no caps. Whether you are starting with new beds or pots, or if you want to add some zing to tired soil, choose Dynamyco to maximize your plant's potential. Dynamyco Endomycorrhizal Inoculant. Fish Poop brand fertilizer is an all-natural fish poop concentrate with nothing added. Real fish poop is extraordinarily complex. Not only are you adding the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium your plants need to build mass, transport nutrients, and enhance flavor, but fish waste is also packed with biological activity and micronutrients. When you add fish poop to your irrigation water, you are adding life force, probiotics, and active microbes. These microorganisms include a wealth of various bacteria and protozoa which further enhance nutrient availability for the plants. Because plants are limited by the absence of any essential micronutrient, these trace nutrients are the difference between having a decent garden and having a garden that makes you feel really proud of your efforts. Fish poop is a naturally complete solution that fills in the cracks in your fertilizer program to ensure you offer your garden a broad base of nutrients. Not all fish poop is created equally. Most products with added fish waste don't reveal their sources or lab results. Fish Poop brand Fish Poop, however, generates their own fish waste as a byproduct of their organic aquaponics cannabis farm where they raise ornamental koi and tilapia. You are even invited to tour their farm in person or on their YouTube channel to look for yourself. This sort of transparency is wildly rare in the fertilizer market. The folks behind Fish Poop are also lifelong medical cannabis producers who have deep connections in the community, donate more product than they sell, and support cannabis prisoner, veteran, and patient collectives and charities. To get your bottle of pure fish poop, go to fishpoop.com. And to see their entire line of cannabis products, go to ounceofhope.com. That's Fish Poop brand Fish Poop. You've heard me talk about the award-winning cannabis seeds that come from the analytical breeding program of Seth and Eric Crawford, who founded Oregon CBD Seeds. In fact, Seth was a guest on Shaping Fire in 2020 to talk about triploid genetics. Seth and Eric are now releasing high THC seeds for home growers and farms as Grow the Revolution Seeds at gtrseeds.com. Their high THC seeds are extraordinary in that they will start to flower at 16 and a half hours of daylight instead of the typical 14 and a half hours of daylight. That means in most regions, your plants will start to flower outdoors in the middle of July instead of the middle of August, which means these photoperiod plants finish in September and not October, totally upending the photoperiod seed market. Seth and Eric took their prized early flowering CBG line and bred it to some of the most desired verified genetics out there, including Sour Diesel, Triangle Kush, Wedding Cake, Chemdog, Skittles, and others. These crosses all express powerful photoperiod terpene profiles and THC, giving you a great high. GTR Seeds has a new THCV line with plants like Double Durban and Gigantor that boast 1-to-1 THC to THCV, and people want that THCV. GTR seeds are very consistent, true-growing, inbred F1s from stabilized inbred parent lines. These seeds are nearly homogeneous, and the plants should all grow the same. There is only one phenotype in every pack, available as diploids and triploids. Seth and Eric's company is still family-owned, patient and employee-centric, and partially powered by their 2 acres of solar panels. Everyone can purchase these seeds and the entire catalog of Oregon CBD seeds at gtrseeds.com. Go to gtrseeds.com today and choose something revolutionary for your next indoor or outdoor run. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is landrace specialist Jeff Nordal. So in the first set, we talked a lot about what exactly landraces are and how to understand them from different varieties of plants that may have come into this modern world in different ways so that we can really be precise in what we're talking about since we are talking about a scientific term. So that was really great, teasing those terms apart generally. But now here in the second set, I want to talk about a little bit about the characteristics of these plants and why we generally all tend to respect them, and why Jeff has focused so much of his life on it. So Jeff, in your videos on your YouTube channel, you are constantly talking about just being like bowled over by the complexities of the terpene profiles. And during the first set, we also talked a little trash about like modern polyhybrids and about how so many of them are massively myrcene dominant. But I want to tease out a little bit more about the experiences that you've had in your garden with unique blends of terpene profiles. And like, you don't have, and clearly you're not going to talk about all 300 that you're growing, but if I want to provide the listeners with a snapshot of some of the experiences you've had. So maybe just like pick three that were especially unique to you and describe them to us so that we can smell it through you.
All right. As far as top 3 standout terpene profiles from this year's garden, and again, every year we're doing different varieties from around the world. But the ones that are super fresh in my mind are the Cambodian. 2 varieties of Cambodian had the most insane passion fruit, like just that tangy, zippy, sour, super tropical, loud passion fruit. Mm-hmm. And I actually went and got an actual passion fruit, sniffed that, and then sniffed one of these Mondulkiri, and then also Takeo, another region in Cambodia. They smelled exactly the same, the actual passion fruit and the cannabis, at least those varieties of Cambodian. So that was pretty mind-blowing. Another terpene profile that you rarely come across in sort of the modern polyhybrid genetics, but which I'm a huge fan of, are the really stinky, skunky, rotten meat, burnt rubber, rotten onions, just super funk. And a lot of times you'll find those in the Afghan, Pakistani. We actually grew some Uzbek varieties this year. And one of those smelled like rotten, decomposing onions and garlic. Really, really funky. It's almost disgusting, but at the same time intoxicating, kind of like the black truffle effect, where it's gross but intoxicating.
Well, I love those cheeses that smell and smell like baby diaper. Like if that smell was coming out of a human, I'd be like, eh. But suddenly now on a plate with crackers, I'm like, yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, that reminds me, there's a really weird terpene profile that actually smells like bounce dryer sheets.
Oh, wow.
Like that really gnarly fabric. And by the way, this is what's strange, is I'm highly allergic to a lot of synthetic fragrances, especially those laundry detergent smells. So I just absolutely am repulsed whenever I smell that smell. But then, and I always said there is no smell in nature that smells like a bounce dryer sheet, but I've actually grown some cannabis now that smells like bounce dryer sheets, and it's kind of weird. So who knows? It may actually help me get through my dryer sheet aversion by smelling it in cannabis form.
It is really strange when you smell something in cannabis that you also exists in the real world. This example isn't as great as yours, but there the blueberry muffin variety from Humboldt Seed Company. It's really startling how much it smells like the blueberry Jiffy cake mix, which doesn't, it kind of barely smells like blueberries that are natural, right? It smells like itself, but it was so strange to smell that variety and be all like, oh my God, like, okay, this smells blueberry, but it smells like the muffin box and those muffins themselves which, have got a little more of a breakfast cereal vibe to them than like a natural organic berry. And it's a fantastic, variety. I've grown it a long time and I love it. And yet it smells like a cheap boxed muffin mix. And it's just a bizarre thing.
It is so wild, the diversity of aromas and terpenes that this cannabis plant can carry and provide, and that can just sort of emerge from these plants. And then when you start crossing plants to whole new combinations of it's pretty mind-blowing. I'm not aware of other plants that have such a diversity of smells.
So I'm going to ask you one more terpene related question. I don't want to spend too much time here because, not everybody can smell it together, right? So talking about terpenes is kind of challenging sometimes. But the last question I want to ask you about this is, tell us about one plant that you smelled where the terpene profile of it was a smell that you had never smelled before, and it blew you away because your brain wasn't sure what to do to it. It'll probably be very hard for you to describe it to me because of that reason too.
It's almost like seeing a color you've never seen before.
Yeah,
and there's that. Your brain just can't even process that. But there's a number of varieties of cannabis that come across in these landrace botanical gardens we do every year that have just it like scrambles your brain because you've never smelled anything like that. And so you can't even find words to describe it because it's such a bizarre smell. That happens quite a bit. And then you end up just sitting there sniffing it because it's intoxicating just to have that experience.
Yeah. So it's so engaging to have that first new experience. We humans go for those.
Absolutely. Did want to say the other really interesting terpene profile that you find in landraces, especially the African and Southeast Asian equatorials, is there's this really interesting carrot parsnip terp. So the reason how I actually connected those dots was my girlfriend was actually peeling parsnips. And the smell that came from those parsnips, I was like, oh, that's that smell. So it's that sort of antiseptic, astringent, really earthy, sweet, fresh carrot parsnip smell. But you'll actually see those in a lot of African varieties, as well as Thai Chiang Rai that we grew this year actually had that terp profile. And that's always a favorite too.
So while we're kind of going through your picture album, if you will, of plants that you love, we've just did terpenes, and I want to do a very similar thing, but with morphology now, right? So how the plant looks, its structure, because, I love when you go through these different plants and I'm like, wow, these are all cannabis plants, but they all have got so much different visual personality. For example, you recently posted a video about one from the island of St. Vincent, and I saw it and I'm like, now this is a plant that would work really well where I live because it doesn't grow big and bushy. It kind of grows like it grows kind of like straight up and down, like it's a pencil skirt or something. And it's very respectful of its neighbors, right? You can walk past it without it grabbing you like most plants do. So I guess kind of like you did with terpenes, maybe tell us like 3 of your favorite morphologies. Like tell us the story of like 3 plants that look atypical.
This year, and again, I'm just going off this year. Sure. Every year there's mind-blowing structures, and but this year a huge surprise was Brazil Amazonia. So I was thinking that was going to be just a long, lanky, wispy tropical equatorial sativa type. This actually turned out to be super short, super squat, bushy, with big, chunky, thick buds. It grew and looked almost like a typical indica, actually, an even bushier, stockier, squattier indica. But it has this wild pina colada terp profile going, this tropical fruit. And then when you finally get around to sampling it and smoking it, it is super high electric, almost like Brazil carnival kind of vibe. Like bright colors and feathers and electric and drum beats, all in a very squat, bushy, actually early finishing. These were all done by the end of September as well. But super electric sativa stone. So that was a big surprise. And also like super bulletproof as far as pest resistance and mold.
It's got all that landrace vigor still going.
Oh yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things too about these landraces is they're just they're so much hardier and designed to not be high maintenance plants. So anyway, they have, we don't even deal for the most part with botrytis. Haven't seen powder mildew in 10 years.
Wow.
And bug pressure is pretty low. The aphids are still kind of a menace. It's probably going to be around for quite some time. They're kind of indestructible, but so anyway, that was one structure that was very surprising this year. Another, the St. Vincent, as you noticed, even though we had unlimited root space. So usually a cannabis plant, when it has unlimited root space, tends to the top of the plant will then become wide and bushy as well to mirror the root system. But for whatever reason, the St. Vincent just shot straight vertical and only was maybe a 4-foot diameter plant, where a lot of ours are like 8 to 10 foot diameter plants when grown in those conditions. So for whatever reason, it just really wanted to stay going vertical. And it got probably 12 feet tall with just really nice uniform sort of candelabra of uniform flowers going. Have not sampled that one yet, but had all the signs that it should be a nice one.
Yeah, and it's special too. I just like plants that look different, you know, like even these mutants that you see people put online. Like I like mutant plants too. It's like people are like, oh, that should be destroyed, kill it, get it out of the gene pool. And I'm all like, okay, maybe all of that's true, but also, isn't it cool? You know?
Yeah, and it may turn out to be an advantageous adaptation. Mm-hmm. You know, that's kind of mutants drive evolutionary change too. So
let's talk a little bit about how the morphology responds to where these plants are from, right? Because a lot of these plants that come your way, these land races, they have themselves over, hundreds or thousands of years have become hot or cold adapted for the areas that they are from. And so, I'm very willing to be wrong because I have not come into contact with as many land races as you have. But generally speaking, my impression is that, equatorial plants where it is, wet and hot, they tend to be more open, airy flowers so that, they can more easily transpire and, kind of respirate and breathe in the heat. And also so they dry out really quickly after, a monsoon or something like that. Whereas so many of the Pakistani and Afghani and, things that are grown, near, these cold seasonal mountain regions, they tend to have these like tighter flowers. And in my head, it's always like, oh, so they can conserve warmth. And I don't know if that's true or not. But I just like to hear your thoughts after having interacted with so many of these plants. How do you see these morphologies, being associated with the different parts of the world that they come from?
Yeah, absolutely. And there definitely is, the equatorial tropical sativas, for the most part, share that larvae or airier flower structure for reason, because they're in an extremely humid, moist environment, and they might even be getting rain quite often. So if it was a super compact, dense flower, they'd all implode, within the first week of flowering, due to botrytis. They'd probably mold out very quickly. So, kind of across the board, the equatorial sativas all have that looser, airy structure. A lot of times, very foxtaily, like foxtails upon foxtails, upon, almost like a Romanesque kind of, fractals of like foxtails within foxtails within foxtail. And but you'll find those are also crystal coated, so they may not be heavy, but every nook and cranny is coated in crystal. So
if you're just talking about straight resin yield, they might actually end up being a bigger one, a better choice, even though they're open and airy.
Yeah. And that's another really interesting thing about, so that's equatorial, tropical equatorials. You'll see that pretty much across the board. But the amazing thing is these plants just don't mold. Botrytis just does not happen unless the only thing that gets the Achilles heel of those tropical sativas is frost. So, and as things start to get cold, if you do get frost on those buds, they tend to die very quickly. So that's the only thing. And even when they die, a lot of times you won't get botrytis mold. You'll just get dead spots. So they're just incredibly mold resistant. Now with like Afghan, Pakistan, Iranian, those varieties, it's not just hot and cold, but those are also extremely arid environments. So very low humidity, where botrytis just isn't as much of a threat in those regions. So the human intervention with those has been to maximize yield. So you get more yield with a chunkier, heavier bud, and if you can push it without botrytis, there you go. The problem is when you bring a super dense chunk Afghan all of a sudden into Santa Cruz, coastal, wet, foggy environment, that's just a recipe for botrytis explosions. And see that quite a lot of people have that experience. We're fortunate where we're growing. We're behind a mountain range, so that catches the marine layer. So we're actually pretty arid in our place, so we can actually pull off these Afghan, Pakistani.
It's pretty obvious from your Instagram that you live in a special bioregion, because seeing all these different plants from all these different regions of the world all growing and finishing, like I've sworn at my phone before. I'm like, how the hell is he growing this? Oh my God, because like I live at the other end, right? I live Pacific Northwest on an island, 50 feet from crashing water that's marine and salty, right? So like I live a terrible place to grow myself, but where you are, it's like, best possible combination of attributes. It's San Lorenzo Valley in Santa Cruz Mountains, has a long cannabis history. And it turns out it's a real nice little microclimate that, it's blocked off from the marine layer, even though we're down in a valley. So you don't necessarily have to be super high elevation, but we're behind a mountain empire grade that actually catches that whole marine layer, so we just don't get that coastal fog. So anyway, so the next thing I want to talk about is the unique cultivation demands of landrace, and that kind of fits in perfectly with the weather conversation that we're having, because I'm sure lots of people who are listening, like me, are being inspired by what you're saying, and we're all like, I want to grow landraces, and have you, from growing so many year over a year, have you noticed any cultivation demands or best practices for land races? Because, I imagine to a certain degree they are finicky to us who are used to kind of growing all of the same plant because these modern plants that we've talked about earlier are very similar to each other, but then you're growing all these weirdo plants, which of course are land races and they're not weirdo, but like they are if you're a cultivator who has never grown them before. So let's hear a little bit about that. Like I'm sure that you have run into some unexpected growing needs that some of these varieties have.
Well, here's the very good news about landrace is they're actually developed to be low maintenance plants.
Huzzah! We love hearing that.
so a real finicky, high maintenance, like OG Kush, that is going to have powder mildew and all this stuff. It not to get back into the dog thing, but it's kind of like, you don't have to worry about with the landrace, like the hip dysplasia and all this like kind of inbred problems with susceptibilities to disease and molds and pathogens. And it turns out actually with the hop latent viroid, most landraces, they can still get it, but don't seem to be affected as negatively as some of these polyhybrids too. So it's actually, yes, all the land races, and we're growing them from all around the world from totally different regions. But because they're such hardy plants that are designed to, thrive without a ton of human catering and pandering to the plant and pampering, they all do pretty. They all seem to have a high tolerance to disease, molds, and pests. So I actually think they're easier to grow than most of the modern polyhybrids that tend to have sort of genetic disease
built in.
Yeah. They've actually they've gone for potency, and who cares about. And when people say, oh, it's a challenging strain or a really finicky strain, there's another way you could say is that's kind of crap genetics. If you have a massively disease-prone plant, that might actually be kind of crappy genetics. No one wants to, be growing unless you're doing some adoptive foster thing for sickly plants or something. Why would you want to grow plants that you have to spray chemicals all over all the time to fend off diseases? How about just getting genetics that naturally fend off diseases? But
do you find that it takes some time with these varieties for you to figure out their like basic needs? Like I can imagine that these different plants from different places have got like different water requirements and different food amendments requirements.
Actually, not really.
Oh, right on.
And I can totally see where you might think that, but here's how we grow. We don't actually really feed throughout the entire year. So what we focus on, and we grow in a hugel culture environment. So where, and what we do is we build a really super nutrient dense, super rich living soil in the off season. And then by the time we plop that plant in that soil come May or June, we don't actually feed those plants throughout the whole year.
Wow.
So it's what we're doing is we provide an all-you-can-eat buffet of compost and organic nutrients that, along with all the breaking down forest debris, sticks, leaves, chunks of logs, and everything. And so now you have all the mycelium that's just thriving in there. So it's kind of like the plant can pick and choose what it wants. It's got an all-you-can-eat buffet, and everything's there at its root tips to absorb. So that's how we actually grow. We supercharge and get really living great, powerful living soil in the beginning of the season, and then the plants just kind of adapt to that. So we're not at all running around going, oh, these Brazilians need some phosphorus, or this needs some magnesium. Like, we don't do that at all. The only time is maybe some of these longer flowering plants that get super, super huge may just need a little bit of nitrogen later in the year if they've gobbled up all the nitrogen. A lot of times we'll do that with just a simple like fish emulsion, compost tea to just balance them out. But no, these are not. They all basically they're all growing in the exact same soil with the same nutrients, same watering, and they just kind of adapt.
So when you're new to a landrace and you don't know whether or not it's going to be, a 4-foot wide or a 10-foot wide plant, do you just give all your plants the same amount of space and let them express themselves?
Yeah. And we're in a fixed. We installed these hexagon shaped planter boxes in the soil. So
you're not moving your grid every year or anything. It's
yeah. So, and we gave them a lot of space because we designed the garden for humans to be wandering around. This is not a row crop yielding industrial garden by any means. It's actually a living art exhibit of cannabis genetics from around the world. And it's cool just growing, but then they make it so much.
It just sounds like a pleasure garden, dude.
So we started this, and we started having visitors out, and it was just so much fun. But this was pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and we've kind of taken a break from having visitors out. And then the hop latent viroid had me really freaked out. Until now, I have a much better understanding of the risk and such, and we're not in a high risk of humans visiting and like transmitting, thank goodness. So, but anyway, the garden's designed to actually for humans to wander around, where each box actually has plenty of space in between, so you can actually, if you're wandering around, socializing, smoking a joint, and you resonate with a particular plant, you can then walk all the way around the perimeter of that plant, see it from all angles, and such. So we give the plants lots of space because we kind of see each one as like a work of art, and we want to give it its space to do its thing.
Good. So, how do you find that these, and like, I recognize that you're outdoors, so you may not have had to done a lot of this, but I bet you still have an educated opinion on it. Like, how do these land races that have never, been cultivated by present growers, how do they respond to things like training and scrogging and like kind of like human dominance?
We don't. Well, that's exactly it. Like, philosophically, I don't see my relationship with the plant as where I'm trying to dominate and squeeze out and maximize and exploit every molecule of that plant to pump out more buds for me.
Yeah, right.
So we don't top, we don't leaf, we don't train. We're just, each one of these seeds is a mystery, and we want to see what this plant's story is. So we actually step back and just let the plant do its thing. So we don't even leaf these plants. And what you'll find though, when you let a plant just go natural, you kind of get a Christmas tree type shape. And then it may be like, hey, how does light get into the inner buds? But the answer is as the buds get heavier on the tips of the branches, that actually opens the plant up as the gravity pulls down those branches. So now all of a sudden the whole length of that branch is now sort of, the entire plant is almost blooming like a flower and opening up. And now all of a sudden the sun can get in to those inner buds as well. But then we also do, because some of these plants are, 12 feet tall, 10 feet diameter. I mean, they're huge. So we don't harvest the entire plant all at the same time. We do like a layered harvest. So we just take the top ripe buds, and then that also allows the sun to now penetrate further into the plant and let those underbuds develop. So we'll do 3 or 4 harvests off the same plant, while at the same time just watching. Yeah, we've given up on all the human manipulations. The one thing we do, though, I should note, is as far as you do have to support the plant. So we just put 4 redwood posts, creating an outer, a box of posts, and then we take organic hemp baker's twine. So it's actually food grade hemp twine, and we just run that twine sort of like a big spider web around the plant to support its branches. So, but that's all we do.
So we're going to take a short break and be right back. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit about breeding land races and a little bit more about preserving land races. So you are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is landrace specialist Jeff Nordahl. The cannabis seed market is filled with big name and hype breeders fighting to get your attention. And occasionally you discover a breeder who is breeding because it is the only thing they care to do, and they would be doing it even if they never made a dime. That's my friend Craig Hartsaw, who makes seeds as Magnetic Genetics. Craig comes from 5 generations of farmers and is earning his master's degree in horticulture right now. He's been growing cannabis for 15 years and been breeding for 9. He hasn't sold many seeds because he really isn't a sales guy, but I've personally been growing his seeds for years, and I know I can always rely on his seeds to germinate, thrive, and smell and taste great. I suggested to Craig that he should probably sell some seeds and asked if he had enough stockpiled to bother. Much to my shock, he was sitting on 5 full menus in cold storage that he produced in the last 2 years and hadn't even tried to sell any of them. He was simply too busy breeding. Well, we, his friends, convinced him to make his damn seeds available to the people, and now they are. For the first time anywhere, you can now buy Magnetic Genetics seeds at Neptune Seed Bank and on Strainly.io. Neptune Seed Bank has just picked up Magnetic Genetics for a trial to gauge your interest. They are carrying 3 strains from his Mean Mug, Prominence, and Terpenado menus, which are exclusive to Neptune. It's an easy way to score his seeds. You can pick up those menus plus his Hillbilly Skunk and Candy Breath crosses and more on his profile page on Strainly.io. If you want very affordable seeds that are exceptional quality with rare terpene profiles from a good guy, go to NeptuneSeedBank.com or Strainly.io. Sometimes it is fun to buy the hype thing from the brand you admire, but when you're ready to buy the strain you'll love from an obscure mad scientist, you're ready for Magnetic Genetics. MagneticGenetics.org and on Instagram, Magnetic Genetics. As cannabis regulations become more demanding and consumers become more educated, it is increasingly important to avoid the use of chemical pesticides when cultivating cannabis. Beneficial insects have been used for decades by the greenhouse vegetable and ornamental plant industry, and today many cannabis cultivators are moving from sprays and chemicals to beneficial insects. Copert has the beneficial insects, mites and nematodes, microbials, sticky cards, and air distribution units you need to partner with nature to defend your garden. Whether you manage acres of canopy or have a simple grow tent in your home, Copert is ready to help answer your questions and help you transition away from chemical sprays towards clean and natural solutions. Since 1967, Copert has assisted growers in identifying pests and devising reliable solutions while providing healthy insects and mites that will protect your yield. Since the 1990s, Copert has been a leader in cannabis pest and disease control worldwide and have highly trained consultants to assist you in Canada and the United States from coast to coast. With their global network of grower support, Copert can help. Visit Copert.com, choose your country, and get detailed information. That's Copert, Koppert.com. For the most up-to-date cannabis-related biological control information, you can also check their Instagram at Copert Canada. You know getting away from pesticides is good for health and good for business, and Copert is ready to help. Visit copert.com today. There are so many seed banks nowadays that you really have options in who to choose. Not only that, if you pick the wrong seed bank, you could be in for a really sketchy ride. And that's only one of the reasons I recommend Gas Lamp Seeds to my friends and listeners who are looking for a seed bank. You probably already know Gas Lamp Seeds as Hembra Genetics. Hembra recently changed their name to Gas Lamp Seeds. Gas Lamp Seeds is not just another seed bank. Gas Lamp is a female-operated boutique cannabis genetics provider that only sells thoughtfully curated seeds from the top names in cannabis breeding. With over 60 breeders and over 1,000 strains to choose from, you will certainly find something you'll love. Gas Lamp Seeds has something for everyone, with over 650 feminized strains, 300 regular varieties, and over 200 autoflowers to choose from. Names you know you can trust, like Compound Genetics, Humboldt Seed Company, Night Owl, In-House, Fast Buds, Gnome Automatics, and Ethos. And we both know that there are other seed banks who will take your money but have no customer service. I invited Gas Lamp to advertise on Shaping Fire after hearing so many good stories about them from my friends. They have A-plus customer service with lightning-fast response times. In most cases, Helene and Caitlin will get your order out the same day you place it. Most seed banks are simply not this organized or interested in getting your seeds to you so fast. But Gas Lamp Seeds cares. You even get free seeds with every order. Helene and Caitlin get it. They have been in the cannabis growing scene for over a decade. Want some extra freebies? Use the code SHAPINGFIRE, all one word, at checkout, and they will give you an additional set of Gas Lamp provided freebies. That's an extra $30 in free seeds. Buy seeds from good folks who will send you great seeds reliably every time. Visit gaslampseeds.com today. That's Gaslamp Seeds. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is landrace specialist Jeff Nordal. So here we are at the big finish, and during the first set we figured out what the hell landraces are, and during the second set we talked about why we have all fallen in love with them, and why anytime the flower is available, serious weed heads are like on it like catnip, because we know that that is the special rare thing that we just, don't have as much access to anymore. And they're beloved for good reasons. So in this last set, we're going to talk a little bit about breeding with land races and then a little bit about preserving land races. So Jeff, we've already touched on breeding a little bit earlier in the show, and it's weird. It's like it's a two-sided coin, right? Like on one side, breeding with land races is exhilarating because we like the idea of taking whatever our favorite, modern strain is, and then breeding it to a landrace strain to perhaps like increase its vigor or increase its resistance to pests, or to grab some of those old school landrace terpene profiles, whatever it is that we're trying to do, or actually the other way, try to breed a landrace to a modern plant to cut down on how many weeks it takes to flower. So there's a lot of reasons that we may want to breed with a landrace, but the flip side of that also is that every time we breed a landrace, that is less of that landrace that exists in its pure form for us to preserve for, medicinal applications, or for just enjoying that landrace in and of its own right. So what are your, I would just like to hear you speak to that about, are you crossing land races to modern hybrids, and what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So, there's two things going on when you're sort of deciding to work with landrace plants. And, so there's two goals. There's, preservation. So backing it up. So realizing that these are possibly at risk of going extinction. So, do a seed, re-up or just an inline breed where you're just preserving that particular line of landrace for preservation. But then you can go off and start playing around and experimenting and doing all kinds of crosses and genetic hybrid work. So those are both totally valid things. But if you just go full-blown hybrid and then lose it's again with the with the dog breed thing, you can't really take the doodle out of the Doberman Pinscher, once it goes in there.
Yeah, once you've bred that land race, all those attributes are all mixed together.
Yeah, it would take lots of generations to try and back it out to get back to the original variety, or at least close to that. So there's really there's preservation going on, and right now at my stage in where I'm at in my cannabis adventures is we're popping new seeds every year, total mystery seeds from these different regions of the world, even sometimes going back in time to the 80s, 70s, 60s. And then we're observing those. And right now we're focused on preserving those genetics. And to do that really well, you can't just go skipping down into your garden with, if you're trying to pollinate, let's say, a Vietnamese plant, you may have your male Vietnamese from that same seed batch, or hopefully like 3, 4, 5 males, so you're getting more genetic diversity. By the way, that's another thing you're trying to do with your landrace seed backups, your genetic backups, is you're not doing a lot of selection right then. You're actually trying to get the broadest gene pool. So you want to use as many females and as many males from that variety as you can. Mm-hmm. So then when you make, let's say, 1,000 seeds, you're trying to capture as much genetic diversity in that seed backup. Mm-hmm. And those are just not primary colors, but these are, your foundation building blocks of cannabis breeding that you want to keep pure. But then once you have those locked in and you have those seeds where you're saving them in a good environment that they're going to last, 10 years plus, still be viable, then you have the freedom to go start making crosses and hybrids where you're trying to improve things or adapt things for like here in California. I may absolutely love the effect, the high that you got from a plant from Laos, but it's a 16-week flower. It's very difficult to grow that outdoors here in California before the storms come in and just beat the crap out of the plant, and it may even kill it, So you may say, hey, I want that Laos effect, but in a plant that finishes, in mid-October. So then you have to start pondering what would be the least intrusive early finishing plant that might carry all the Laos effects with it on top of it. You get what I mean? So that's totally cool, totally fair game. I don't think that's disrespecting any cultures. I don't think that's culturally appropriating, as long as you're crediting the wider global cannabis community, and then are transparent with how you created that variety. Like say, if a Thai and a Laos plant and an Afghan went together, document that and let people know that's where that plant came from. Those are its lineage. Then I think that's respectful as well to the origins and the farmers who created these plants. So that's totally cool and fair game. But the sort of ethical, short-sighted blunder would be to immediately, at least this is my opinion, just immediately start making hybrid crosses without backing up and preserving that original landrace that may have taken hundreds, if not thousands of years. to create that unique genetic. So
when you say back it up, would that just be a simple open pollination, like in a tent or something? That way you're not losing the pollen into other plants, but you're just letting them all make more seeds.
Yeah. So sorry, I kind of rambled on that. So the thing is, if you're dealing with a lot of varieties of pure lines of landrace, you can't be sloppy with your pollen and just bring pollen down into your garden and potentially have that pollen drift onto other plants.
Right.
So the technique that I use that works well, but I'm open to other ideas if other people have come up with other techniques that work, is anyway, what I do is we grow the landrace plants out in our landrace botanical garden. That's where you get the big 10, 12, 15 foot tall plants. But before those plants go into flower, I label each one of those plants with its variety plus its pheno number. So it might be Mexico, Jalisco, 3 out of 4 Jalisco plants we're growing. So this one's number 3 pheno, right? So I'll take cuttings off that number 3 Jalisco plant, take those cuttings to my other property, root those cuttings, and now I have very small versions of that plant that are now I'm keeping them in like a 3-gallon pot. So now when I need to go isolate them for pollinating, I can easily just move them around my property. And then the males I keep in a separate area, and then we even isolate our males for a time to make sure some other plant's pollen is not drifting onto that male plant. So we know we're getting just that pure pollen, and then that pollen gets taken to that very isolated cluster of, let's say, Jalisco number 3. But when we're doing, let's say, Jalisco, if we had 4 plants, I would then put Jalisco 1, 2, 3, and 4 cuttings all in one area, right? So we've got the cuttings all there. They're now in flower mode. And then I hopefully will have 3, 4 Jalisco males. And I'll take all that pollen from all 4 of those males and then go evenly distribute that over all the cuttings. You got what I mean?
Yeah, I totally follow. And I really like the idea. That you take the cuttings early on when the plants in your main garden are in veg, and then you just move them away. Because honestly, before you explained that you had this second property, I was trying to picture you safely pollinating these plants in your garden with all 300 landraces. And I'm like, that sounds like hell, man. That sounds impossible to succeed.
Oh, no. Yeah, you get pollen drift. I mean, you kind of have to treat pollen like Ebola. It's like it just gets everywhere. It will find a way. The cool thing that most people know, though, is with pollen, water will immediately render it non-viable. So that's another way to get a dirty hippie to shower a lot, too, is
to put him in charge of the pollen.
Oh, yeah. I take 10 showers a day, if not more, when I'm in the middle of doing breeding projects. So we do kind of an open pollination, but we do it on just a very small, with small little cuttings. And my understanding, at least, is that those cuttings from those original plants are the exact same genetics. So those seeds will be true to that plant. It just makes it, you have a lot more agility and easily being able to isolate and transport plants around for breeding.
Cool. So I want to continue down this preserving path that we've started on. I think a lot more people are thinking about land races. I guess I'm going to talk about 2 levels of magnitude. Generally, people are very interested in landraces because, especially if they're connoisseurs, because so much of modern cannabis tastes the same. So the interest in landrace is increasing, and they are seen as elite and very desirable. All of that's true. But also, as kind of like global travel for cannabis people, continues to increase. And along with the technological ways to tell friends about them, we're getting experiences like recently a lot of people watched on Instagram, Kevin Jodrey and Danny Montero and IG Landrace Genetics. Like they put together a group of people and all went to Pakistan, right? And so I was riveted by those videos of like people who I know and my friends who are like suddenly in Pakistan, places where I normally only see represented in like war and terrorism movies, and suddenly they're all there, like wearing beards, in Pakistan and interacting with the locals and checking out their hash and checking out their plants. And I was all like, wow, this is great. Like I wasn't, on this trip, but I feel like I got a bunch of these experiences from the trip. Right. And so it just increases the meaning and value of landrace seeds and genetics in my overall head. And so I think that there's more and more people who are just interested in landraces, which is good, of course, because, the landrace origin areas like Thailand specifically are starting to get, we're like a bunch of our people are bringing seeds there and developing them in Thailand. And so their natural landrace is getting diluted. Right. So all of this is to set up this question that, I can see that landraces are going to become increasingly popular. And yet we already are trying to preserve them for medicinal reasons. I'd like to hear you speak to the idea of preservation and how do you think that land races are effectively preserved? And B, do you think there's any chance in hell that we're not actually going to eventually lose all the land races because they are a set number today, and that number is likely just probably going to continue to decrease? But maybe I've got an especially jaded view of it. So I know that's a big question, but I'm just going to hand you the mic and hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So, the extinction through hybridization is incredibly real and it's happening. A lot of people are sounding the alarm like, hey, we really need to start backing these up before they all go extinct as far as these land races. So, yes, that is really happening. And
so the extinction is a real concern. Period. Full stop.
Absolutely. And it's not just like pollen drift. It's actually, folks, we're going to get to a point. I mean, we romanticize here in the U.S. We may romanticize this little secluded fantasy village, in the Himalayas that you hike up to and you think you're going to find this like amazing weed that's grown by monks or something, or the whole village like grows this magical weed. And you take this trek up there and you get up there and they're like, hey, we got cookies.
And we got Coca-Cola.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, yeah, we're growing gelato and diesel and OG and,
that's the kind of cookies that you mean. You mean
that's.
I thought you meant like Western foods. You mean
no. I mean, it may be that they're like blasting. I mean, no, it's cool, but they may be actually blasting Snoop Dogg and growing, California strains up there, and we of course romanticize that they're supposed to stay isolated and unique, when in reality they want to.
They want to grow the hype too.
They want to integrate, and they're watching stuff in California and Amsterdam, thinking that's really cool. Why would they want to grow their grandfather's old larfy weed? So anyway, these are just like cultural phenomenons and things that happen, and there's no judgment or anything. You just have to realize that these are things that happen. So there seems to be some value in preserving these genetics, and a lot of these genetics, could go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they're kind of, in a way, almost like cultural biographies or even autobiographies from the actual breeders,
like antique art is too.
Yeah, and they're infusing, so it's a plant, but it's also infused with culture's values and their stories and such. So in a way, it's almost like their cultural part of their cultural story too. Just like their food and their seasonings and dishes and
religion,
dance and religion, and the cannabis is a reflection of those values and aesthetics that they've chosen for. So it'd just be a super bummer to have those disappear and just get hybridized or such. And then once some of these cultures also may go through the hype phase, there may be in 20 years, all of a sudden a reinterest in their heritage genetics. And if someone wasn't backing this stuff up, it may be gone. And it may be that they actually have to look outside to other people who happen to keep those genetics, from their trip that they took to that region. They've been keeping them in their sock drawer for the last 20 years, So it doesn't seem to be negative in any way by backing up and preserving these genetics. And it just seems like a good long view strategy that there is value in keeping these genetics around and preserving them, if nothing more for just historical purpose. But I'd argue there's probably tons of medicinal compounds and terpene combinations and such that may actually have some real medicinal value going into the future, and then just the effects and everything else. So there's a lot of incentive and reason that these genetics really should be backed up. So and lots of different people around the world are playing different parts, either by gathering and hunting these seeds and actually just collecting them. And then other people are sort of distributing them as hubs, for people who are interested in access to these genetics. Something that we've sort of toyed around with here in Santa Cruz, and something that I'd really like to be a part of, and even potentially work with a larger organization who has grant money and such, but to actually put together an actual cannabis seed bank, like a public domain seed bank, to try and back up, especially as far as landrace genetics, try and back up and preserve as much of those genetics as possible. But then, very important philosophically, that would be public domain where everyone would have access to these. There's no proprietary ownership of any of these genetics.
And you'd be preserving them for their own right. You don't mean like a seed bank, like people use seed bank now very often as just like a seed bank store or a seed bank distributor, where there's the profit motive primarily. You're talking about a more classical seed bank, like those of us who save seeds, right? Where you're making a library.
The seed preservation. Yeah, like the seed preservation that's going on in Norway or wherever.
Yeah, exactly. That big building that unsurprisingly flooded.
Yeah. So those kind of seed banks, and like here, UCSC, University of California, Santa Cruz, did something else, which was the Human Genome Project, where they mapped the entire human genome and then put that in the public domain. So they were in a race with some of the pharmaceutical companies and researchers who wanted that information to be proprietary. But UCSE and our sort of hippie for the community sort of vibes, at least UCSC decided to put that all in the public domain. So it was the Human Genome Project, where anyone can actually access that information. And we'd like to see in that spirit something with a cannabis seed bank or library or archive where everyone would have equal access to all those genetics. For, there'd be a procedure to obviously to get them, but where they're available to everyone, because we kind of come from the philosophy that humans did not create cannabis; it came from the universe. And so, who are we to claim ownership? It's cannabis is here for the people, and the magic of it is connecting more people in a positive way with cannabis. Like that has the potential to actually shift things in a positive trajectory for this plant. But if we're going to start playing these ownership, proprietary, exclusive, commercial dollar chasing games with a plant that generally, when you consume it, a lot of times has the opposite effect or opposite message, that would be, that's definitely in the spirit of just the cannabis experience, is making things available to everyone in equal access. Share the love.
That's beautiful.
To break it down.
Cool, man. Well, I think that's a great place to stop on that message. I really love that. And so, Jeff, I want to first thank you for, I know your time is valuable, and, this time of year is really busy as, you work through, your plants coming down and curing and all of that. And so thank you for making time for us, number one. And then number two, I'm really grateful, for you as your personality. You're such a chipper, easy to like guy on your Instagram. And that is exactly, how you showed up authentically here today. I can't imagine there's anybody who's been listening to the show who wouldn't like to hear you talk more, and then B, wouldn't enjoy sitting down for lunch and a chat on your deck with you. You're such an amiable dude with such vast experience on this very particular topic that we all get giddy about. So thank you for coming on to Shaping Fire and sharing with us your experience.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for the interest. And in some point in the future, our plan is to actually have people come out and visit our property, so we can just sit there and geek out and nerd out and stand there in awe staring at these amazing plants. So that is the goal. And with COVID and everything, it made it tough to have visitors. So those videos that you've watched really is coming from that intent, is actually wanting to share these plants with others and inspire others to take a closer look and maybe delve into the unlimited, infinitely amazing landrace world.
Fantastic. All right. So in wrapping up, dear listener, if you would like to keep tabs on Jeff and his landrace amusement park that he runs, I recommend at the top of the list, you follow him the way I do on Instagram. And so that's really easy. That's Jade Nectar, all one word. Now, that is an absolute have to. If you want to know more about Jeff and his medicinal preparations, he is an expert in the acid forms of cannabinoids. He even holds U.S. patents, which is not something that was on the topic today, but he's a very interesting cat. So you can find out more about that aspect of his goodwill at his website, which is jadenectar.com. And then finally, if you want to see sometimes longer forms of the videos that are on the Instagram, you can also search Jade Nectar on YouTube for some of the longer forms of the videos. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news, exclusive videos, and giveaways. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. Be sure to follow on Instagram for all original content not found on the podcast. That's at Shaping Fire and at Shango Los on Instagram. Be sure to check out the Shaping Fire YouTube channel for exclusive interviews, farm tours, and cannabis lectures. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.